Tonight we have with us Lauretta and Michael Kehoe, and they are the authors, I think just one book right now, Dream of Dragons, right?
That's right.
Okay, so except Laurie, I'm trying to get this, I'm used to, mirror images, so I'm adjusting this. Laurie has also compiled and edited her grandmother's collection of poetry, most of which was it all originally written in Hungarian?
About 7 of the poems were.
Okay, so most of them actually were in English.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't realize that. I thought most or all of them had been translated from Hungarian.
Yeah, there were seven out of, I think 100
okay.
total. Yeah.
And who translated that for you?
I hired somebody on the internet. I kept looking for somebody who could do it at a reasonable price. The problem is one guy wanted $1,000, somebody else wanted $500, and I got a student who was from Hungary, and she was willing to do it for nothing.
Wow!
But I gave her $100 anyway because she did so much work. Hungarian is not an easy language to speak or to read.
As if you're from Hungary.
Well, if you're from Hungary, it is, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm always told English is the hardest language. To me, it's easy, but, I do have that advantage of having grown up with it. So tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and, how you come to all of this, your background.
Well, this is a second marriage for Mike and I. We have 5 children between the 2 of us. And I've always been an artist. Most of the time it was painting and drawing. But I also had that creative side to write. And I wrote a lot of short stories when my son, who's now 36, was a baby. And I went through a divorce and kind of put everything on the back burner. And then 2 years ago, and I'm going to let Michael take this away, to what started us to our whole new career, not just in writing, but many other things, we made some changes. So I'm going to let him take that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm actually a comedian and actor and singer, but I've never really done any of it. Well, I did the stand-up comedy professionally. And like she said, life got in the way for both of us in our separate life before we got together, and pulled me off the stage. And then we raised our blended family. And finally, we got to the point where, I always felt that pull to get back on stage. I wanted to entertain. I wanted to be in front of people. So long story short, I ended up meeting up with this one comedian, Jody Miller, and I had written a monologue. And I also do this geriatric Elvis comedy routine. She thought what I was doing was, she said, "You got to do this." So I left there all fired up, and that was a big day for me, because that was the turning point in my life, where up to this point I had been dreaming all this time. And it's good to have dreams. We all have dreams. But I realized, at least for me, when you're dreaming, you're usually asleep. When you're dreaming, you're not taking any action, right? When I turned my dreams into goals, when I came out of that meeting with Jody, I was determined to make this a success. And when you have a goal, and if it's a sincere goal, absolutely nothing will stop you. Nothing gets you, you're going to have obstacles. People telling you can't do it, that's easy. But you know what I mean? So things are going to come up to try to stop you or prevent it, or, and you just have to plow through those. So once I had turned that dream into a goal, I went and got a costume made, and the lady making the costume said, "What are you going to do with this?" I said, "I don't know yet." So, but I'm going to do something. And, so that was the difference. So, and then I started doing well with the Elvis. So then I took singing lessons, and I wanted to get into movies. So I auditioned for a movie. I got cast in a co-starring role in my first film. So I took acting lessons.
Fantastic. What film was it?
It's called, what's it called?
Las Vegas,
Las Vegas, Vietnam. Still waiting for it to come out. But
do you know when it's coming out?
No, I don't. But since then I've done background work in Godzilla and Jason Bourne, Jungle Cruise. You know, so I've been on set with some of these real powerful actors, and now I have a supporting role in a film called The Devil Comes Dressed for Church 2, and I'll be filming that in Birmingham, Alabama this August. You know, all because I got off my butt and just did it. I didn't wait until, you know, all the stars aligned or whatever. I just went out there and made it happen. Well, now Laurie's like, I want to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book, so write it. So she did. She wrote it. Because this was in her heart and soul for all these years.
I had written a short story about this story when I was writing when my son was a baby, and it was actually from a dream. And so I resurrected that story. I changed a lot of it, but the basis of this story was from a dream 40 years ago.
So what was the dream about?
The dream was about, I don't want to tell too much to give away the book, but it's about Anne's transformation to protect Henry. That was the biggest thing I remember from the dream.
So that must have been a powerful dream to inspire the novel.
And it stuck with me all these years.
I had a dream like that. It was really wild, and I need to turn it into a short story. And was it Robert Louis Stevenson? I think a lot of his books came from dreams too.
Really?
I'm positive it was, I think Treasure Island did.
Wow.
I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson that was prone to nightmares. And one night, you know, he was thrashing and yelling in his sleep. And his wife woke him up, you know, to save him all this agony. And he was upset with her. He said, that was my next novel. Now I don't, you know, whatever he said. But he was upset with her for waking him up because that's where his books were coming from. And I'm pretty sure I have the right author. It's possible I'm wrong, but I think it was him. But definitely one of the authors who wrote some of the darker, scarier stories in some ways. It was from dreams. So where are you living now?
We live in Las Vegas. We're originally from Chicago.
That's right. I remember that. And we met in Hawaii.
We went to Hawaii, yes. It was
and what is your full-time job now?
I am a contract specialist for our county hospital. It's called University Medical Center. Before that, I worked for MGM Resorts for 15 years.
Okay. So what got you into writing? You only started, when your son was a baby, and then you took a long break?
Yeah, because of going through a divorce and trying to raise my 2 children by myself. And then Michael and I got together, and with Michael and I, he had custody of his 3 kids. I had custody of my 2 kids. So it truly was a blended family, and it was very difficult for many years trying to raise 5 broken children.
And so you got back into writing. I knew about Dream of Dragons, about 6 years ago? I think we first talked maybe in 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And so you started writing it, 7 or 8 years ago, or a bit longer?
No, probably about then. I wrote the book in about 2 months.
Really?
But then once Michael got a hold of it and I told him to write his part, then it took a lot longer for us to develop the story more. So it took about a year total before we finally finished it.
Yeah, it was, she asked me just to read the book originally, just give a male perspective. And in all honesty, the storyline itself wasn't any, the type of book I would seek out on my own. You know what I mean? And when I read the first chapter, there was so much. I found it hard to read for me personally. Not that it was a bad book, but and I couldn't help myself. I had like input, like dialogue and stuff like that I put in there, and I actually typed it in the margins and read. And then I stopped after the first chapter. I said, honey, you know what? This book is not, I said, if I go, if you ask me to read this thing, I don't want to, I thought I'd be insulting to her. You know what I mean? Because I was putting stuff in there. So while she read what I wrote, she goes, oh my God, this is great. You got to finish. you know, but I was in acting and I was working at my day job at the time. So, and for me, not, you know, I didn't have the benefit of having dreamt this 40 years ago. I was reading it for the first time, and for me, writing with anything, my comedy or anything, I get inspired and stuff just kind of flows out of me. Does that make sense? I can sit down and produce something, but but when it hits me, and then I can't stop. I can't keep it inside. So I would do that. I would read this. I would contemplate it. I would think about it. Then all of a sudden, I would have these spurts of inspiration, and be in the middle of the night or first thing in the morning, and I would be there, and I'd be typing for hours, and you know, like it'd be a Saturday morning. She's coming down 10 o'clock. Why don't you wake me up? We missed breakfast. So, and I'd been there since 5, and I didn't realize 5 hours had gone by. So that's how it is for me. You know, I can produce something, but doesn't necessarily mean it'll be good. So.
And I love it when that happens. Years ago, when I was about 22, 23, and I was writing my first novel, which I haven't published, I had turned our walk-in closet into my office. I put a desk in there and the computer. I went in, I think at 8 o'clock one night after I put the kids to bed because they were all little then, like 3 and under, 2 and under or something. I went in at 8 o'clock at night and I thought I was in there, I don't know, half an hour. So I said, I better go get some water, whatever. I came out, I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right.
5 hours and it just whoosh, just by.
So.
I love it when that happens. So I'm interested in your comments about your first impression of the book and what was it about it that you found unreadable, that you changed?
I don't know, it's just, I read a lot of, I read like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, Ray Bradbury, science fiction, that sort of thing. I didn't read a lot of fantasy, growing up. Certainly didn't read any romance. I mean, so, and the first chapter, it just didn't really wow me, so, and she had told me about the story of the book, so I was thinking of it more of just as and again, not having read any romances, but, just, it's going to be a romance novel, so I didn't really think I'd be interested in it. So, but for me, when I started reading about the characters, in my mind, my mind kind of ran away with them and it made them bigger in my mind. You know what I'm saying? But right now, again, I'm only in chapter 1, so now they haven't fully developed, obviously. You know what I mean? So, so that was it. It was not that there was anything wrong with the book, nothing at all. And once I get into it, it's like, wow, this is really great, and I was really glad I could put my humor into it, or my, I had a lot of fun, expanding on the characters in some ways. Like Heidi was my favorite.
A lot of Heidi is him.
Yeah, so I had so much fun doing that. And I mean, I got a younger sister, so there was that dynamic, you know what I mean? Growing up, so anyway, so I was able to feed on that or use that. So that was it. So again, it was, if you had just told me about this book on the shelf, I probably would have like, okay, that's not, give me something with, more action in it or horror. I read a lot of horror growing up, Alfred Hitchcock, stuff like that, so, but that's why at first it wasn't, I just wasn't into it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've liked about editing and being in my writers group is that I get exposed to books that I never would have picked up otherwise. One of the books I've published, I'm actually supposed to be doing 2 more for this author, but he hasn't sent me the manuscripts. They're horror, and Keith Ferrario. I never would have thought I wanted to read horror. I had this image of it, but when I got into the books, I found out the whole genre isn't quite what I thought it was. And so by the fact that I was kind of, I don't want to say forced, but because of what I do, I was exposed to something I never would have picked up. So Sean, I'm curious, how did you come across A Dream of Dragons? Because you and Laurie have been for a long time.
Yeah, gosh, you're gonna have to help me out a little bit, Mr. and Mrs. Kehoe. I believe, did we just connect on social media because you were looking for beta readers?
Yes, I think so. And then
Yeah.
you had told me about your book. And so we started, I think I was saying I wanted to exchange books.
I think that's what it was, yeah. And then I was privileged enough to get to read the unpublished draft of A Dream of Dragons. That was a lot of fun to get to read that as an unpublished book and feel like you're almost get it before everyone else. And yeah, I really, that's how we met. That is it. It's been so long, it's hard to remember. But what's really cool is because of you guys, I got in touch with Gabriel's Horn because I didn't know Gabriel's Horn existed, and I was looking for a publisher. So, small world.
What was your first impression of the book, Sean?
I really liked it. This is a genre I do like. I'm kind of like Mike. I don't read a lot of romance, but this had enough fantasy in with it that it made it palatable to me. So I really enjoyed it. I liked the pace, the action. Without giving too much away, I don't know how much you want me to give away, but I really liked the fact that the main character in here goes into the story like a baby. She knows nothing. And you guys did a really good job of making it believable that she becomes a person throughout the story. I really like that. So that was what really drew me in.
Were you able to read the book, Becky?
No, sorry. Haven't been doing much reading lately with my eye.
Dealing with eye surgery, yeah. Yeah, that's a shame. How has the book changed, Sean? Because you've probably read several versions of it as it's gone through a lot of editing and different people working with it.
Yeah, I haven't read the Gabriel's Horn version yet. I do have the Tate publishing, and I started out reading the original manuscript, and I hope I helped tighten up one thing that I think a lot of authors have a problem with, or at least I do, is I tend in my drafts to overwrite and then cut down, and I think that's what I picked up on maybe as something that could be improved upon when I was reading it. It had some overwriting in it, but once you tightened up the script, and once you had it, like I said, I haven't read past the Tate publishing version, but it was a lot better in that version because a lot of that had been tightened up. So yeah, it's turned out being a really good book.
That was one advantage I had, is not just Sean, but and you, Laura, I had several authors who read the book, published authors who read the book and put their comments to help me get through it. And that was huge to have the advice of like Sean and Chris, can't remember his name.
Chris Powell?
No, him too.
Okay.
But
yeah, because he actually did one of the covers for it, didn't he?
No.
I'm thinking of your book, Sean. Chris did the cover for Hell on Earth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that has sort of a dragon on it too. So
yeah, it's very similar actually. I mean, it's not identical, but it has the same overall theme. Yeah.
So I had that advantage of having people like both of you and other published authors to help us mold it into something better. And then, like Michael said, we do everything backwards. And he started singing, then he took singing lessons, he started acting, then he took acting lessons. We wrote the book and published it, then we took writing lessons.
Yeah, who is it you've worked with? Jerry
Jenkins.
Sorry, I say that.
Jerry Jenkins.
That's right. Tell us a little bit about studying with him, and maybe for our 5 million listeners, who is he?
Jerry Jenkins is the co-author of the series Left Behind. There's 20-some books in the series. He wrote it with Timothy LaHaye, and it's about the rapture and the last days. And Jerry is an author who's written about 190 books so far. And
The slacker.
Huh?
I said the slacker.
He's published about 70 million, sold about 70 million books. So he had offered this writing guild it was a guild at first, and then he developed his own course called Your Novel Blueprint. And it was very intense studying, and he was very hands-on. He edited our first chapter. He gave advice throughout. We went to a seminar with him in Nashville last year. Got to talk to him personally, but he was very, very involved with his students. And then I also took a class with James Patterson on Masterclass.
Oh, fantastic.
And then another writing course with another Christian author who's also sold about 70 million books, and his name is Ted Decker.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I've heard of him.
yes.
Love Ted Decker.
I like his books. I love his books.
Yeah, he writes a lot of dark Christian books, kind of like Sean and I, and that really drew me in. And so at one point, we had started to become a member of a church, and I guess the pastor didn't like our book and said, you can't be a member of our church, and it devastated me. But I wrote to both Jerry and Ted, and both of them supported me and gave me a lot of, and you did too, a lot of encouragement.
I think we talked about that when we met in Hawaii less than a year ago, but closing in on a year. We had talked about that, about why the pastor might object to your book, which is a Christian allegory.
Yeah.
And, do you remember some of the things we discussed about that?
No,
my thought, especially as I read to the end of it, was that it's very real. And I would assume that made the pastor uncomfortable, because here's this woman who knows nothing. I mean, she really is like a newborn baby, except she's an adult. And so there are some things that happen that I can see a pastor going, oh no, everything needs to be squeaky clean and perfectly innocent. Well, that's not real life. And I think I always felt that the same was going to be an issue with my books, which is one of the reasons I never even sought traditional publishing, because it's going to be too secular for Christian publishers, but it's too, what's the opposite I'm trying to say?
Christian for secular publishers.
Too
Exactly.
Too Christian for secular publishers,
Yeah.
but in my mind, and I think this is true for your books too, Sean, and I think for you too, Becky, all four of us sort of, or I should say 5 of us, kind of write in this area where we are making characters real. In secular fiction, nobody ever thinks about God or church. It just doesn't exist. And in Christian fiction, everybody's running around going, hallelujah, I'm saved. And once they are saved, they're perfect. And I'm like, wow, I wish it worked for me.
Yeah, which is why I like Ted Decker so much, because he gets very, very dark.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he has been banned by the Christian booksellers and some Christian bookstores too. But it's like Jerry told us, he said, you can go as dark as the Bible goes.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah, some very ugly things happen. And I mean, like, who is it? Is it Noah that his daughters get him drunk? Because it's talking about, you don't remember that part, Becky?
Yeah.
Yeah, unforgettable.
I thought was it Noah or Abraham?
I think it was Lot. I thought it was Lot.
Yeah.
But
It was a lot.
A lot as I said it too.
It happened a lot.
it happened a lot. Too lot.
Yeah. So, but
well, my feeling was, I mean, Christians swear, and Christians have sex. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? And when people ever say, well, you're a Christian, how could you have done this or whatever? I'm like, I'm not perfect. The only difference is I'm saved.
yeah.
I mean, so I mean, not that I don't try to be a good person, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to be perfect. I always say there's only ever been one perfect person that ever walked facing the earth, and we crucified him. I mean, so you know what I mean. So I mean, come on, I mean, I'm doing the best I can. So I think people can relate on that level. Like you said, I don't have to be perfect, because as a Christian, we go through our daily lives, and stuff happens,
Yeah, and
Like
we-
I relate a lot to Sean. I'm on the last chapter of The Battle is O'er. And I have to tell you, this is my favorite series by far of any
Thank
series
you.
that I've ever read. And Sean is so real. And he does things he shouldn't be doing. And he doubts. And he's real.
Mhm.
And I really love that.
Yeah, and I've been really surprised. I was just discussing this with someone the other day, and I don't remember who, that I know a couple of people who will not read past the first chapter, and I've been surprised at the level of hatred readers have for him because, yeah, he's a real jerk at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying I went to college with a whole bunch of guys, I listen to them talk, and frankly, I don't think Sean's that different from most of them. It's just that he's very upfront, and I, as an author, am very upfront about what's going through his mind. But I listen to these guys, and I'm not going to say their names because certainly at least 6 million people will listen to this recording. But there were 3 guys who were famous for giving their booty report every Sunday morning, and they would use the public phones because it was the 80s, late 80s, and they would call each other up and they would trade stories about, did you get laid last night? Yeah. And they would describe these women, and they would, and I sat with the trombone players because I played trombone, and they would kind of forget that I wasn't one of the guys, and they'd be sitting there discussing the girls they had been with. And, I found out really quick my freshman year, all these girls think that, I slept with this guy at a frat party, he's in love with me. I'm there the next day with the trombone players hearing what the guys really thought. And this is, and I went, wow, they don't respect these girls. All they wanted was sex. And they don't care if the girl thinks that they're in love with her. So I was seeing it from 2 completely different sides. And that's part of where Sean came from, is this is just the way they were. And, they were shaped by their culture. I'm not even criticizing. I'm just saying Sean is more accurate than I think most people want to believe.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's part of why I was surprised when I started hearing. And, I don't think it was a bad thing. He is despicable in his way. I just don't think he's that unusual. But Henry, this is a bad segue. I was about to say Henry is the same way. Henry is not the same as Sean. He's much more honorable, but he's very real in that.
He did his sheriff party.
Yeah.
He just kind of retreated after he did all this partying, and he ended up in the hospital after being too drunk to know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And Heidi told him, stop that. Then he finally stopped what he was doing, but he dealt with it by withdrawing into himself, but he still was,
had his issues.
He still had his issues, and he'd still pick up girls, and didn't want to commit, have one night stands were fine for him because he was angry.
Yeah. But I think he's very real, and I think that's part of what makes this a powerful book. He has doubts. He doesn't just wake up one morning going, oh, I see the light, hallelujah. People don't. For most people, I think it's a gradual process.
Well, it took a lot for him to finally turn back. I mean, we don't want to give it away, but it was physically, it was a lot that he had to go through before he was in a position where he had nothing left but to turn to God.
And I think that's very true to life, that people don't turn to God until they hit rock bottom. They don't need to, or they think they don't need to. So is there anything of you, either of you, in these characters, and in which one, if there is?
There's a lot of the doubts that Henry has were a lot of things I felt. There's a lot of other people, like there's my father. My father was a Navy guy. That's where the Navy comes from. My father was an artist. There's a lot of Michael, the loving animals. I don't know how much of it was me, except maybe the doubt and, you know, some of the anger. It's hard to say. I don't feel that there was that much of me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there was much of you? Maybe more of you and Heidi.
Well, no, more Henry. I really, I found that after doing Henry, that whenever anything got changed, like with his dialogue or anything like that, I was taking it personally. Because I really got into Henry. So there's a lot of me in Henry, a lot of motivation, you know, and so on. And then again, Heidi is just kind of it's not that Heidi's my sister, it was just kind of the interaction between the two of them, you know, having, my younger sister really wasn't that dominant, but, and I was constantly teasing her, but believe me, anybody in the neighborhood messed with my sister, I was right there. You know what I mean? So like, no one messed with my sister. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? So, but I could. So I gave her a hard time. Well, you know, but we loved each other. We do love each other very much, and so on. So that dynamic was a lot of fun for me. I wanted to make it fun for the readers. You know, hopefully they could relate to that in some way, hopefully in some level. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of, you know, she wrote Henry, so there's Henry, but then I put a lot of the humor in Henry is me.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, you said that she first gave you the book asking you for a male perspective. Do you feel that when you first read through that you looked at Henry and went, this isn't quite what a guy would say or do?
Definitely. There were times, and I didn't read it. I purposely didn't like read it through, then go back. Just like I did with the first chapter. As I would go through it, I would do it each chapter at a time, you know, so I grew with the characters, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? It was the same, you know, that whole dynamic was real for me because I got to be one of the characters, you know, yeah. Actually almost all the characters, but especially being in the Henry. So that's one of the reasons it took so long. I didn't want to get ahead. I you know, what he was going through, I went through at that moment. So, yeah. So.
And one of the things that we've discussed with previous authors is this idea of how do you get into the head of somebody who's so different from you. I just did a Books and Brews interview, I think that just went up a few days ago, where one of the characters is a dog, you know, and I think we discussed, how do you get into the mind of a dog? So, you know, my main character is a guy, and I think maybe I could get into his head, or at least I think I did, because I spent so much time in the world of trombones. I spent a good part of my life from the time I was in 6th grade until I was in my 30s, surrounded by men. So, you know, I do feel like, even though I had no brothers, and now I've got 7 sons, so. But, so it sounds like you did a lot of rewriting of Henry. What sorts of things did you change? Like 1 or 2 examples?
Well, some things, gosh, it's hard to be specific, but there were certain things that, like you said, a guy just wouldn't say this, or a guy just wouldn't do this. It was like a stereotype image of what you would think a guy might do. Mm-hmm. One thing that helps me as an actor, one of the things that's very difficult about it is you have to be willing. I mean, let's say you have to play an axe murderer or a wife beater or something like that. Now that's obviously something I cannot relate to, mm-hmm. but you have to be willing to allow yourself to go there. And you have to be able to go there 100%. Yeah, you can't be partial, you can't hold back, because if you're not going to be able to believe it, no one else is going to be able to believe it. Right. So that's something you have to be willing to commit to. So for me, it was easier in that respect. The other, like Stephen, the bad guy, yeah, mm-hmm. he was. Well, you know, it was kind of fun doing that, not pleasurable fun, but you know what I'm saying? It was to be able to step out of me and try to get into that head of that character. Yeah. So as an actor, I find that easy, you know, you have to be willing to commit 100% to that, even though in real life I I would not have anything to do with anything like that.
I think that's part of what I really enjoyed about writing about Sean is he does all the things I would never do.
Right.
Mhm.
The way he's living this wild, crazy life with money and wealth and doing anything he wants. I think a part of us wants to be that, but we have, most of us, the civilization hold us back from doing these things. But there is something kind of fun about being the bad boy. So I mean, Sean, you wrote about Satan, you wrote about some horrible people. How do you feel about getting into their heads?
Well, I mean, I agree with Mike. I mean, one of the things you have to do is you have to 100% commit to the character,
Mhm.
whether you're acting or whether you're writing a character into a novel, which is a little bit scary when you're pretending you're Satan. But yeah, it's I mean, it's definitely a process. You've got to get in and think, how would this person react to this situation? How would it, and you know, it wouldn't be how I'd react, but you've got to get out of your own skin, so to speak, and get into this other character's mind, no matter how dark or evil that person is, in order to get the audience to buy into it. Absolutely.
Well, and I think it helps us as the reader to think about something beyond our own experience. I mean, talking about getting in the mind of Satan and demons, look at the screw tape letters, you know, and C.S. Lewis did it in a humorous way. But I think it's been a powerful influence on millions, if not billions of people to say, oh, is that maybe what's going on? Maybe I should think about it from a different point of view, because it enlightens us and changes how we view what we're doing. So
that goes to the whole thing of writing dark.
Mhm.
You know, and Ted Decker talks about that, is you have to write the dark because otherwise the light can't shine.
That's a brilliant quote. So what you've kind of touched on this, but go into more what sets your book apart. And Sean, I'd be interested in hearing your view too, since you read the book. What sets it apart?
I'll let you guys go first. I got to fix my answer.
I think what sets our book apart from other stories is the emotional depth that it goes to. And that's what connects to everybody is the other author, Christopher, he said, Anne stayed with me. I couldn't get her out of my head. And that's what a lot of people say is the emotional, they're drawn into these characters and they feel them. And that, I think, is what sets our book apart from just a shifter or any kind of fantasy book. It's that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a very powerful image of her in my mind. And it's not just from the book cover. Again, yeah, it's a powerful image. But you know, what's so brilliant about that picture you found is that's largely how I did imagine her.
Mm-hmm.
And you found a picture that just suited her. But even before I saw that, I had that strong image of her. And not only her physical beauty, but that internally, she has such a beauty of spirit to her. She is memorable.
I think one of the things that helps set our book apart is, again, doing everything bass-ackwards like we did. You know, I didn't follow the rules because I didn't know what they were. So there was nothing inhibiting me into just writing. You know what I'm saying? Just raw, getting it down there. And even now that I've taken some writing lessons and there's certain rules and technicalities and stuff like that, but even that I take with a grain of salt. I let the creativity come out and not worry about trying to fit into somebody else's rule or dynamic or whatever. Just be yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's what helped our book.
Yeah. We have done Bob Miller's book. I believe we did The Smart Kid. Is that right, Becky?
Right, yeah.
He's a huge fan of Katie Weiland, who writes books about outlining your novel and is very focused on pinch points and plot points and, you know, where everything should follow what percentage of the book through. And I've enjoyed reading that. I've enjoyed trying to put some of my work into that framework, but I do also think that some books just are not going to fit that framework. And I'm not sure my writing would, but it's an excellent framework, but sometimes you do have to go off that path.
Mhm.
And you've had time to think of your answer.
Yeah, I've got it's so much. It's hard for me to narrow down what makes your book different. But one of the things, I guess, you guys kind of hit on it, but you've taken a lot of the rules that supposedly is what makes a successful novel. You bent them, but you didn't break them. And I guess that's what I liked about it. Like I mentioned earlier, I liked how you took something, really almost everything's been done to one way or another. But you've been able to take a new twist to it. Like I mentioned earlier, I really loved how the main character was such a child at the beginning of the movie, or the book. It'll be a movie eventually, I'm sure. But you took this character at the beginning of the story, and you developed her from being essentially an infant to being a fully intelligent, normal human being to the extent that she was. But you did it in a realistic way, and that was something that you had to do very specifically. If you messed that up, it would have made the whole book unbelievable. So I think you guys did an excellent job of that. I think that's what really made it unique. Yeah.
Thank you.
What was your favorite part of the book, Sean?
Oh, I'll be honest, I'm trying to remember. I mean, I haven't read this book since about 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember, I liked how I guess I don't have a favorite part, but one of my favorite overall themes or ideas of it is how the woman, Anne's the name of the woman, right?
Right.
Yeah, how she actually changed, is it Henry? I'm trying to remember the names.
Yeah.
Okay, I did get their names right. Anne and Henry, how she influenced Henry's life. And if I remember right, there were some situations that are actually kind of embarrassing for Henry, but he learned through them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I really liked, those scenes, because they were so human. When you'd see those, and you'd see Henry's walls kind of break down a little bit, and I like that. I just thought that was really done well. So.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's hard to pinpoint a favorite scene, but some of the favorite parts of the book are, like you said, Sean, more general ideas. Just the way we see Henry gradually falling, and you did that so well, because too many books, there's just this abrupt change, and you go like, really? No, but nobody changes that fast, and that totally. But we see the process happening with him, and you did that really well. I like the part where she's drawing, and he's just amazed to see how she learns to draw fast. I love watching her paint these images of the things she's seeing in the dreams. I love seeing Henry grow from this, just as you said, the walls are all up to the point that he really lets somebody in and lets care about somebody and takes the risk again.
Michael has a saying that prompted me, and when I started the book that I remembered that, is that, like a horror movie, if you don't care about the characters, you're not going to care about the story.
You're not going to care what happens to them.
Exactly. So when we wrote the characters, that was foremost in my mind, is that you need to care about them, and you need to care about them right away, so that you'll follow what happens.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things to write was when Henry had to go shopping for Anne.
Oh yeah.
For what?
For Anne's feminine needs.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and putting Henry through that torture, that was fun. But anyway.
Yep, men the world over. What did you find the most difficult to write?
Probably the most difficult part to write was when Fleck died. I actually was crying when I was writing.
When who?
The little dog, the little dachshund who.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I was actually crying when I was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard.
What about for you, Michael?
When the intimacy between them, that part, I'm more of a, I'm the humor guy, so it was a lot of fun. The interaction between Henry and Heidi, and and like I said, when Henry was, because Anne was just Anne is like the little kid, like when you have little kids. And you're not careful what you say in front of them, and then you repeat it in front of other people. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of the way I approached the dynamic between Henry and Anne, because she would just be so innocent and childlike in some ways, and then it would just embarrass him, which was fun to do. So, but the difficult part was the intimacy between them. Where for me anyway, to write that part, like I said, the romance part of it was kind of hard. So.
I can see that for being more into comedy. Having done some of the editing, I found the most difficult part, again, avoiding spoilers, but Henry is pushed more and more into letting his guard down and turning to God and letting himself love again, in part because of what's happening to Anne.
Right.
And really, truly horrific things do happen at the end of the book. Toward the end, speaking of dark, I found that very challenging to write it in a way that maybe portrayed how horrible it really was without crossing a line into just, possibly getting the reader off, without getting too graphic. It's hard to walk that line.
Yeah, that's one of my difficult things too, is walking that line and not letting myself go past that, and it's nice to have you and Michael to help keep me in check so that I don't let my imagination go beyond that point.
Yeah, and it's easy to let the imagination go there, and in a way, as a writer, maybe it really should, because again, as we discussed, writing things that are real and not sugar-coated and not silly fantasies of what life is like. For, I don't know, somebody who hasn't actually lived, I don't know. But yeah, that's a hard thing to do. What was your favorite part of the book to write?
His favorite, he said, was I said
the right off the bat when Heidi first comes in and starts giving Henry a hard time over what he's doing. So yeah, the dynamic between Henry and his sister was my favorite part. So,
my favorite part. I really don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't necessarily answer that question either. What do you find is the hardest part about writing with someone?
When we have a disagreement on ideas, and like one of the stories we're working on is what we call our Salem witch story. I found out my relatives were involved in the Salem witch trials, and we thought about, well, what if the Salem witch trials were caused by aliens? So the story is going to be about the Salem witch trials being a result of alien experimentation, and we have two different ideas.
Well, it was my idea.
It was his idea. I saw a different part,
Yeah.
and so sometimes getting those ideas to connect, which is why I've written what I'm going to write, and now he's going to write what he's going to write, and that's how we work, is that we each write something and then the other one takes over, but getting that initial idea together is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say what your hardest part is?
The hardest part about writing this particular book?
No, with somebody.
Writing with you? Being right all the time? No. Yeah, well, the hardest part for me, like with this first book that we did, is I was always afraid. I didn't want to turn it into my book and destroy her vision. You know what I'm saying? That was the hardest part for me, was keeping her original vision and adding to it as opposed to changing it or taking away from it.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to go that far with it. So that's why with the sequel,
He's writing the
we're
second
flip flopping, and I have a vision in my mind for the sequel, and I'm gonna write that, and I'm pretty excited because I finally got to where I'm ready to really just let loose and do it, and
Mhm.
I did have not, I like to think of myself as a pantser, but literally the first book was all written for me. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't have to think about where we'll be going next. So I really had to flesh out characters and a basic outline in my head and on paper. But I have my characters down and my realm down, and I'm pretty excited about it.
So you're gonna show him?
I will.
Okay.
But,
He's got pictures of his characters.
Do you really? Hold them up.
well, what's going to happen in the second book is they're going to be brought back to the dragon realm. So it's all going to take place where Anne came from originally. All right. So I have I have different, so I have an actual map of the realm, and I have different, like this, as you can see this.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's Frost. That's one of the dragons, obviously an ice dragon.
Mhm.
This is now this is just artwork that I found that I keep posted just as inspiration for me.
Mhm.
And this is Flame, which is obviously a fire-breathing dragon.
Mhm.
And I have Tank, which is these dragons don't have wings, but they're armored. Okay, so they're basically like soldiers. And then I have Jade, which is from a forest area of the, and then I have Indigo, which is a black dragon, and he's kind of cool because you don't know if he's a bad guy or a good guy throughout the whole thing. So that's kind of some of the main characters that I have for this, and I just have the whole story from start to finish, and Anne and Henry and my favorite Heidi will all be taken by the golden dragons are not all destroyed. So and then there's something that they're needed to help there's basically Safin's boss basically in that realm. So and it's all about a crystal egg, and they need to help make sure this egg doesn't get basically not that I'm going to use this term, but taken over by the dark side. So they're needed in this. So so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's all going to take place in there. It's going to be a lot more fantasy. Where this was set in our world. This will be set in their world. So they're going to be thrown all and it's, they're all these humans are not going to be thrown into this realm that they now have to help in. So it's gonna. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be a lot of fun to write. So hopefully people will like it.
Because the first book, Dream of Dragons, wrapped up so neatly. I had no clue there was a sequel coming.
Yeah.
There's 3 sequels.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
And the second 2 after Michael's are already written, but the third one is kind of, we don't know if we're going to go with it. The fourth one is Aliens, and that one's already written, but on my side, Michael has to do his part on it.
So she tends to make her villains very, very polite, which
he doesn't like my point.
Well, I mean, they're bad guys. I mean, so
yeah, I got to make him better.
So I can go in there and make him meaner. So, but anyway, this was, I love these 3 characters so much, and I wanted to throw them, take them out of their happy everyday lives and throw them into this turmoil. And anyway, I hope people will enjoy it. So
Okay, sorry, I had to grab the cord and plug in the computer. Because it's crossing the room and I'm afraid my dog's going to step on it and knock the whole computer down here. Here she is.
Well, he had to get up a moment ago because the cats were fighting outside the room, so he had to go break up the fight.
She doesn't like cameras. She seems to have an instinct for when there's a camera on her. There she is.
Oh, hi, baby.
Sweetheart. Hi, sweetheart. Yeah. She's been really clingy since this whole thing with COVID started, and she just wants to be by my side all the time. So I unplugged the computer because I could just see her walking right across and yanking the whole laptop off its.
Yeah.
But I didn't want it to suddenly die on me, even though it probably is good for another hour. So you sort of answered the question of what's next. You've got 3 sequels, plus you're working on the Salem witch trials.
We got my space cop story, and he's got one we call Moon Boy.
Moon Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the moon landing in 1969 just was very exciting for me as a 12-year-old boy. And I followed Neil Armstrong and those guys, and I used to be part of some sort of NASA thing where they sent me stuff every month and things like that. So there's a lot of stories about the moon itself, and the dark side of the moon and everything like that. So it's the story basically about a man that's in the Air Force and was in the astronaut program, but his father got lost on a mission to the moon. But he's convinced that he's still alive, and he is on the moon. So he goes after him. He goes to rescue his dad. So anyway, just that's kind of the idea. And the Moon Boy, our oldest son went to St. John's Military Academy with Jim Lovell's grandson.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And so the grandson's, in school, his nickname was Moon Boy. So that's where the name came from. So
that's very neat.
Yeah.
Before we start to wrap up, last couple questions. And either of you, Becky or Sean, have any questions for Laurie and Michael?
I guess I don't have any. My questions were going to be what you guys got coming up next, but sounds like you've got a good series on the Dream of Dragon, so I'm going to be very interested to read those, but I don't have any particular questions I could think of.
Okay.
Great listening to everything, though.
Yes, thank you. And great having you on. Because I would just say, I appreciate both of you. And Becky, I look forward to reading yours.
Thank you. I was just going to ask in terms of the team writing. So, were there like times when you got offended at the other person, or yeah?
And sometimes, like I said, I got very protective of Henry, where, like if you're taking away some dialogue from Henry or changing something, it was very personal for me. So it's hard for me to not get emotional about it. So
yeah.
But,
I would think that would be tough.
Yeah, it is. There's time where we step on each other's toes. I mean, as husband and wife, we're going to do that. So. But I would, the bottom at the end of the day, it was like, this is your story. It really is her story, that she wrote. So I would have my say, but I was always bow to her final decision, because I wouldn't, I don't want to take her dream and make it mine. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to help it. I didn't want to change it.
So she had kind of veto power.
Yeah, I have to veto.
And willingly, I willingly gave her that. I mean, because she needs that. I mean, it's her story, So
like this next one would be his. He'll have the veto power.
Right. So
yeah. And I think that's really key, is that willingness to hand over the ultimate authority to one person, because I think all of you know that I co-wrote a book called 221 BC with Kendall Price. And it was his story, and, you know, it was always, here's what I think, but it's your book.
Very, exactly.
You know, and he was very open to also, I trust you, whatever you think. So because both of us were so willing to just listen and say, you know, what do you want? It really went very smoothly. Last question, last two questions. What advice would you give new writers?
Two things. Don't give up. Don't get discouraged. And don't just think that you can write. Take advantage of the classes and the teaching and professionals like you and Sean as beta readers. Learn, you know, like taking the classes that we took was huge.
Mm-hmm.
So hone your craft and don't give up.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I've done some beta. Well, I'm sorry to say I've read some published novels by people because it's so easy to self-publish, and they should have gotten a little more input. All
Yes.
good stories, but the craft needed a little bit of work. So how can readers get in touch with you?
We have, both of us have a website. Mine is www.Lauretta, Lauretta, Kehoe, Kehoe.com. And Michael's is
Mike K Entertainment.com. Yeah. So, and it's got everything on there: Elvis and author and actor and
full service
speaker
website.
and so on. And my advice to writers will be the same advice I gave her: just do it, just write it. If it's in you, do it. Don't worry about, you know, yes, what Laurie said is important, but just go ahead and do it. It's kind of like comedy. When you write comedy, when I was first doing this way back in the 70s, as a comedian, when I get off stage, there's always somebody there with advice in the head, you know, and so on. And then I ended up constantly trying to change my actor. Please, well, that person wasn't there at the next time. So
Yeah.
after a while, it's just like, you know what? This is my act.
Yeah.
Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to hate it. Some people aren't going to care less. You just have to be true to yourself. Yeah, I mean, and then just do it. Just get out there and do it.
I think that's something we find in writers group, right, Becky, that sometimes three people are telling us three completely different things.
Right.
One of them wants this and one of them wants the complete opposite.
Right.
And I think we have some people who maybe try too hard to take everybody's advice, and
Exactly. You can't.
you can't, because you can't please everybody, and what one person loves, somebody else may hate.
Right.
Mhm.
There's an audience for you out there.
Mhm.
There's somebody out there that, you know, there is an audience out there for you.
And I like that advice of just do it. And that's the whole basis of NaNoWriMo, which is short for National Novel Writing Month. I think is it NaNoWriMo.org?
So yeah.
WRIMO.org. I'm pretty sure it's .org. And so I always advise people, if they really want to write a book, that's the premise of it. In November, you sit down and you do it. You quit saying, I'll do it tomorrow, because you only have 30 tomorrows now. Or
That's right.
likely. So you're either going to do it in those 29 days or you miss it. And so it's a real incentive to just sit down and do it, and at least get the ideas flowing, get it down on paper, and then you can go from there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I will wrap up by saying this is the last of our spring book club. We are not doing a summer session for several reasons. And we're looking at putting together a list for the fall. And hopefully we'll get that taken care of and have that up and available soon. So then we look forward to seeing everybody again, maybe starting September.
So